Sad meal. That's me. Today I want to go through my mixing and mastering process. I've had a lot of requests for this on Instagram. Now I'm no like super producer, but I think like my mixes and mastering they're okay.
Oh, that's so sad. Oh, that's so sad.
They're okay. So that's what we're going to go through today. So to start with, I've done this little like diagram thing here, and this is sort of like my thinking as I mix and master. So as you see here, like it's a 3D cube. Our x-axis, our vertical axis, represents the frequency. Y-axis is stereo image. I don't know if you can read that, but yeah, that's stereo image. And then our depth axis, our z-axis, is the depth of the mix. And that can be manipulated with like reverb and delay and things like that. And then this green pyramid sort of thing here, I don't know if you can see it, that's sort of where I position my elements. So obviously on the lower frequencies want to be narrow and the higher frequencies want to be wide. That's why I've got the sub as low as possible and our white noise very wide and very deep. And then this red line here is, my writing's awful. My writing's like my 7-year-old son's got better writing than me, but that's his prominence. So obviously the stuff that we want to really be in your face in the mix, we want it towards the center and towards the front. But yeah, I think this diagram is really useful to get you thinking about mixing in like a 3D space. It's a good reference, if you know what I mean. I've got such a cold. Right, so before we even start making music, you can create a template that will do quite a bit of the mixing for you straight away. So I'm quickly going to go through my template. So I've got a drum group, and in this I've got a main drum group, and that's made up of the kick and the snare. And then under that group I've got cymbals, and this has got a sidechain compressor that is sidechained from the main drums. And then I've just got a few slots available there. Then I've got a percussion group. Again, you could sidechain this to your main drums, depends if they're overlapping or not. So yeah, that's the drums group. Then I've got a drop group which has high pass at 100 Hertz, which basically that removes any sub low end. And then it's got a volume shaper on with this sort of shape, and then I can adjust that whenever. Then I've got a subgroup with another volume shaper on, and then on the actual sub I've got high cut at 105 Hertz. Now this sometimes I might even move up to like 140-ish. Obviously on like phone speakers and laptop speakers and stuff, you don't get a lot of sub, so sometimes I might saturate it a bit, so you just got that little bit of crossover into the mids, so you can actually hear the sub on those speakers. But I don't always do it, it's not always needed. Then I've got an intro group. Again, this has got a volume shaper on. I don't high pass these because I don't really use the separate sub for the intro, because obviously most of the time I'm making dubstep. I like my intros to be kind of dynamic and then my drop to be like slammed. Then I've got an effects channel, again high pass at 100 Hertz, another volume shaper, and then on the vocals nothing yet, I'll just mix them as we go. Then I've got this MIDI track here called Sidechain Trigger, and this is an external instrument that I've then duplicated 4 times, and each of these is being sent to the volume shaper on each of them groups. And all that does is, say I draw in a MIDI note here, when this hits it'll trigger all them volume shapers, and that will duck everything on those groups. And then what you'll notice is in each of these groups, I've got them all set to -15. And then they're all grouped into the pre-master, which has got a utility on it that's got a +15. So I put these all at -15, and then this turns it back up to 0. So I can write with it fairly loud. I don't have to turn my speakers up too loud. But when it comes to mastering, I can turn this off straight away and boom, I usually have between 3 and 6 decibels of headroom, so it's just done. Like, I don't even have to think about it. Some more seasoned like mix and mastering engineers might see that and go, "Ooh, no," but it's working for me. I'm okay with it, so it's up to you. And then outside of this pre-master, I've got a reference track that's muted. So say I want an A/B between a reference track and my mix, I can just press solo on there and it will play the reference track, and then I deselect solo and it'll play my track. So yeah, that's my template that straight away is doing a bit of the mixing for you. So in my opinion, dubstep, especially the more melodic stuff with a lot of layers and things like that, is one of the harder genres to mix, as well as you like to have it like really loud and heavily compressed. So for this demonstration, I'm going to do like a melodic dubstep drop, and then that way you're going to see everything, aren't you? Now, before we even start writing, a massive thing that can make a world of difference to your mix is just sample and sound selection. I see some people and they're dropping in either bad samples that then they have to spend like hours tweaking and mixing and things like that to get to work, or good samples and then they're like layering them when they're already fine, or like tweaking them when they're already fine, and then it just makes them sound worse. So just get some good samples to start with, like especially drum samples and things like that, and then we'll go from there. So recently I've been using these Pixel Terror samples. I think they're really good. I've just sat here like clicking these and I was like, well, I can't hear it. I've not even got my headphones plugged in. Now, generally speaking, you want your kick and maybe snare to be like the loudest elements in your track. I'm going to start with the kick at -2. And then I'm going to do the snare at -3. Next up, I'm just going to do some hats. So I made a hat 2. Now, as you saw in my diagram earlier, we want the higher elements to be wider and obviously the lower elements narrower. So with my hats, what I like doing is I like to pan them quite wide. So they're like going like, and it gives a nice wide mix. Hat 1's going to be -12, and then hat 2 can be 12. So as you can hear now, it's obviously wide. You've got it panning between the two speakers. That gives a nice wide mix. Obviously we don't want them very loud, so I'm going to take them right down to -16 each. And then a crash. That one wants slightly louder, so we'll go to -14 with that. And then I usually have like a ride, like pinging away through it. I use this Cashmere one. I have this way down, like -18-ish. Maybe even less, maybe like -22. At the minute, I haven't got the sidechain working. So what I do is I put this ratio up like ridiculous, take the attack down and put the release up ridiculous, and then bring this threshold right down. Now this is going to sound really extreme. And then I'll move the release back until I'm happy with it. And then, you know, you can hear it's quite extreme, so just bring the dry wet down. So then straight away, you've got a nice loop there. And then these cymbals, they don't need any low end, so I'll stick this EQ8 in, select this to a hard high pass, and then I usually do this at about 400. So I'll play it now, and I'll adjust this, but it's usually around 400 hertz. So we're at 530, that's how much low end we didn't need there. Chances are that these samples have already had all the low end took out, but I just do it for safeguarding anyway. And then this ride here, because it's quite like a wishy-washy white noise layer, it's not really there as a cymbal, it's more as like a spectrum filler. I use the Ozone Imager, it's free, and I stick that on. Now this is probably wide anyway. And then if you look at these on this vector scope, this cone here, if you start having stuff like over here, when you collapse it into mono, I'll talk about mono compatibility in a minute, but yeah, when you collapse it into mono, this will just, anything outside of this cone will just disappear. So what you want is like some of it may be speckled just outside, but like the majority of it, you want it in here. And then another thing that you can do to fill out the spectrum is use crowd noise. I tend to use this Cashmere Mega Crowd Raw, and then what I'll do is I'll take out that part there the loudest part, duplicate that throughout the drop, turn this right down, and then again we want the imager. Looking on this imager, it's plenty wide as it is, so I'm not going to touch that. And then an EQ8, and we're just going to high pass anything that we don't need out. If you look on the analyzer here, you've got stuff all the way down here. Like if I solo this, can you see it's just removing like this mud that you don't need? Now I know that seems negligible, but if you imagine that plus every single one of your other layers, that tiny bit of like mud stacking up and piling up and piling up, before you know it, that's like a lot of like mud in your mix, taking up headroom, dirtying up your mix like in a bad way. But some people will say like you don't need to high pass everything, which is true, but in like heavily digital, like super compressed dance music, I personally think that it doesn't hurt to high pass stuff that's not needed. Now listening to this, it's still quite loud, so I might even drop it to like -24. So now I've got like what I like to call the bones of the drop in. And I've done very little processing to it. Like I said before, sound selection's key. The kick and the snare, there's nothing on those tracks. They're just good samples. So now we're going to the drop and we'll program in a melodic dubstep drop. So I'm just going to figure out like a basic chord progression that I'm going to use for it. So this is just literally like default serum saws, but I've just made a little progression. So now I'm going to show you, again, back to the sound selection, the patch that I'd make to make these layers. So the first one's just the bass note, which is the fundamental of the chord. Usually I have this at a 9 unison maybe. I want the blend quite high in the middle with the middle voice. And then if I go on this global, bring this down to about 60, maybe even like 50. And then that makes it quite mono. Then add some distortion. And then compressor. And then what I'd do is I'd duplicate that. And then on this one, I'd turn the compressor multiband off. And then I'd add a filter and just have like the top end cut off slightly. And then less detune. And then an EQ8 on this one. So this is the high one with the multiband on. So I'd high pass this at 100. And then I'd scoop out a bit at the between 2 and 250. Then with the second one slightly filtered down. Bring the shelf down, and then no high passing, because remember the drop group's already high passed, but what we want is a slight overlap, like carrying down, so that our sub and our mid bass are sort of like meet in the middle, so there's not a big gap between them. And then with these synth layers, which is like, this is basically Supersaw's stack. What I tend to do is I like a square wave with an odd number detune down and the blend down, so you've got your middle voice quite prominent. And then with this one, maybe bring the octave down. And then after that, you want a unison way up to like 12, the detune quite higher and the blend about there. And then what we want is this middle note here. If we copy that an octave higher, and yeah, like when you're making these Supersaw, I'll go more into like a melodic dubstep video in the future, but basically you want to mess around with these like chord arrangements and inversions and stuff. But for now, and then we're going to compress it, put a multiband on. And then this reverb, I like to put a plate on and a tiny bit of the mix. Don't like that detune too much. And then I can hear in this second part that this goes too low. So if I just invert that up and then have it go. I know these aren't great chords, right? So now, looking at this, we've got, these are all set to 0, and obviously we want our kick and snare to be the loudest element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this down to -5, this down to -5, and this down to -5. And then we want the sub to follow the bass note, so we copy that down to the sub and check it's in the right octave. So I'm happy with that. And then we take that down to -5. So I can hear that these bass notes aren't hard enough. So this one here, what I can do is I'm going to add a saturator, and then I'm going to do a medium curve and put the soft clip on. And then this synth here, I think it's missing a note below. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this top note this time. And I'm going to take it down an octave. So as you can hear, just like the actual voicing of the chords can make a big difference to how like full your super source stacks sound. And again, we can cut out some of the frequencies that we don't need here. So we'll do this at 100, and then I'm going to take this down here because you get a lot of mud around 200 hertz. Now, as you noticed, we didn't change the voicing on the chord stack. We didn't change the width because, you remember my diagram, you want it an upside down pyramid, getting wider, and then obviously if we want it some stuff kind of deeper in the mix. I'm going to turn the mix up a bit on the reverb. This synth here, because we've saturated it, doesn't need to be as loud. And then what we're going to do now, I'm going to copy the bass note, but it doesn't really matter what the note sits at as long as it matches the pattern, because what we're going to do is going to turn this oscillator off, we're going to put the noise on, and we're going to go to the bright white noise. And we're going to put the filter on, but we're going to select a high 12, turn the resonance down. I'm going to do that about 540, compress it. Put some reverb on it, and then again another filter, and we'll go high 12 again. We're just going to mix in the level of this. I'm going to stick an EQ8 on, and we're going to high pass it. And I think the nasty frequency that hurts everyone's ears is about 3.4 kilohertz. So we're going to make a big dip here. So now you can hear the difference that this is making. This is without it. And this is with it. And then, of course, we want an imager. Make sure it's nice and wide. So as you can see, that's quite mono there. So what we're going to do, remember the triangle, white noise, we want it really wide. Now, as you can hear, that sounds very muddy, and that's because we've not put the sidechain trigger on yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert the MIDI clip here, and now I've got sidechain trigger, and then I'm going to line this all up with the kicks and snares, and you will hear the difference this makes immediately. If you haven't got Volume Shaper or what was the other one, LFO Tool or something like that, I do really recommend it. Like, obviously you can use like the standard Ableton compressor and just sidechain, but like Volume Shaper is just on another level. So yeah, now these are in, you'll hear the difference. Now we can hear there's a bit of a lag. Now I want to keep that gap between when it hits and when it comes back in for the sub, but for the drop we can bring that up a bit. So if we just move this all slightly this way, and then listening to all this, I still think it's quite loud. So what we can simply do here is we could just turn this down like a couple of decibels, the whole group. So far we've gone through some good mixing of like layers and things like that and stereo space and stuff. But what if I wanted like a really upfront in your face lead? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little melody now. I've got this melody. I know that can be quite piercing at the minute. So I'm just going to sound design this. I'm feeling a square wave for this. Again, odd number, blend way up. And for this layer of the lead, I want it very mono. So, you know what, nice tube. Compress it. So we'll put a tiny bit of plate and a tiny bit of the mix on. If we look on the imager, it's pretty mono, so we could even bring that down a bit. Again, chuck the EQ8 on. And we can hear there's a piercing frequency. Now, this is going to sound horrible, but what we can do is we stick the Q up on this and we'll just comb through to find any frequencies that hurt our ears, and then we'll duck it the other way. So it's all around like the 3 to 4 kilohertz range. So we'll open the Q up again and we'll bring that down slightly. And we'll put a bump at about 1000 hertz. And this is where our lead's going to sit. So then on here, what we can do is at 1000 hertz, we can make a little notch in our super saws to make room for that already. So straight away, we're making room before we even put them together. So this is our like middle layer that's going to cut through the middle of the mix. And I'm going to drop this to like -3. And then what I'm also going to do, because we want this up front, is I'm going to stick a glue compressor on. The way I use this is I put soft clip on, take the attack down, the release up, ratio up to 10, and then I bring the threshold down until this just starts moving like it's tickling it. Like that. And then we stick the makeup up. Out there. And then we can take this down to -5 as well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to take the imager off and the glue compressor off and the EQ8 off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this detune up, the blend out, take the reverb way up. And then now, again, stick an imager on, and we'll bump it up at 1000 hertz there, and maybe turn this layer down to like -7. So you remember the red line at the front of the pyramid, the prominence line, that there is where the mono layer of the lead is sitting, and then you've got the reverbed out layer to spread it out on the sides. All together, this sounds like this. Now, obviously, listening to this and the melody and chords that I've made, they're not great. So that's basically my mindset when I'm arranging things and using that pyramid. So now we'll move on to mastering. Now, normally I'd master in this project, but when I've got OBS running and recording the screen, when I put my mastering chain in, my CPU just goes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this utility off to give us our headroom like I spoke earlier, and I'm going to export it as audio. So I've created an audio track outside of this pre-master going straight into the master of a fresh track, and then we'll just stick this mastering tutorial on, take the warp off. There we go. So this is my mastering strip. I'll turn it on and I'll go through it. So the very first part is a utility that is just the stop one with a bass mono from 120 hertz down. And then next up, I've got Kazrog's K-Clip 2. I think we're up to 3 now. As you can see, it tells me it's not free and that I should pay for it. I have paid for it, but for some reason it doesn't recognize the license, but it still lets you use it. And basically what this does is, I'll draw it for you. So imagine this is your waveform here, and you see you've got these like spikes where your transients, if your drums are hitting and stuff like that. They call this Crest Factor. So like the highest point of your waveform to the lowest point of your waveform is your Crest Factor. And what it does is it basically like, it narrows that down. Now obviously you could use compression to do this anyway, but K-Clip is really good because it can basically do that to your waveform, but still kind of keep the character of the track. Like you're not going to lose all your transients. It's still going to be nice and loud and punchy. I'm going to play it, and I've got it on hard clipping master plus 4 dB. And then basically I've got these linked, and I'm just going to turn these up until I start to hear it distorting. Wait, I'll turn all these off. So I'm going to do it like 18 decibels. I don't normally get that, but like normally it's about 16. But as you can see here, you can see the waveform there. I know it's small. And then you compare it to this over here, you can see the difference in it. So yeah, really useful plugin. I definitely recommend getting it. Next, I've got my API. This is a Waves thing, and it's got a thing called a Hogarth Mix Slam. And basically all this does is it's like a softish, it's called a slam, so it's not soft, but in terms of like dubstep, it's a softish compressor that just brings everything again closer. It starts like compressing and stuff. Then I have a sausage fattener, and I have this at between 7 and 9%. Again, we're just incrementally crushing that waveform down, but we don't want one plugin just doing it and like ruining all the transients and distorting it to death. And then next up, this is the one that I probably tweak the most, is Ozone 7. I'm on Ozone 7, but you can use any version of Ozone. And the first thing that I'm going to do is band 1, I'm going to set to high pass, and I'm going to put this to 20 hertz. The reason I do that is you can't hear anything below 20 hertz. Like there's no way human ear can hear it. We might be able to feel it slightly in a very big sound system, but it's just flop. And that bit of noise that we don't need, that we can't hear, that's going to make your speaker cone like wobble really slowly, could potentially take up a lot of your headroom. So we're just going to get rid of that. And then put this to 3400 hertz or 3.4 kilohertz, and I bring that down by a decibel. Just make it quite a wide cut, because again, that's that frequency that pierces your ear. Next, I go to the dynamics, I click all and play and press learn. It'd help if I turned on the thing. Right, so I've turned it on now. So we play and press learn. And then what I do is I go through each of these bands. So the low band, I usually do this about 3.5 ratio. The mid band, I usually do 5. Upper mid band, I usually do 4.5. And the high one, I usually do like 3. And what I'm going to do is just going to adjust these now. I like the sub to just tickle it. With this low mid band, I tend to find that I have to compress this more than any other band. And I'll show you what I'm looking for in a minute. This one again, I want it to just tickle. And this one again, just a tickle. Right, down to the imager. So straight away I leave these as they are, but I moved this to about 250. Basically everything below 250. If your music's going to be played at clubs or at a festival or whatever, anything below 250 is just mono anyway. So solo that. You can see we've got some stereo width in that low end, so stick this right down, -100. A nice solid foundation. Second band. So I've got that -43. What I'm looking for is sort of in the middle. I don't want it like towards the edge of the cones here. I want it, you know, generally central. Then this upper mid band, maybe -10, and then the top end we've gone 16.5. So I've added a bit, but not a huge amount. And then the maximizer, the way I have this set is you've got this IRC4 with modern. It's a really good feature that Ozone 7 added, where basically, like, as it's compressing, it'll even out your EQ as well. So say you've got like a build up in somewhere, basically cheating. I'm not a very good producer, so. And then what I'm looking for is I'm going to bring this down, and when you see this top line up here, when this starts to slightly dip, that's when I'm like happy that I've compressed enough with Ozone. And now I can hear that K-Clip's working too hard, so I'm going to go back and open K-Clip, and I'm going to turn this back to -17. And you can see there, this little notch here. That's all I'm looking for. Once I see that, I'm happy. And what I want to check now, whilst we're here, is that it sounds all right in mono, because obviously like a lot of phone speakers, laptop speakers, and some clubs, it's going to be played in mono. So we'll click the mono button. We don't lose a lot. Like, you lose quite a bit of the super saws, but it's still there. So I'm happy with that. And then next I use the Aom Invisible Limiter. Really good limiter, like you can really crank out a few more luffs. So what I've got is this Ulean loudness meter, which is a free plugin. I've got to turn it on, and when I press play, we've got -10 luffs here. Dubstep, like melodic dubstep, I'm looking at about -4, -5 luffs. If you're looking at like super slam dubstep and you want it to be like at the same level as like all the big like Never Say Die guys and stuff, you want it like -3.5 to 4 luffs. Like, it really needs to crunch. But for this, I'm going to aim for like -5. So what I'm going to do, I've got the output gain as -0.3 decibels here. I've got the oversampling as 16 times and the overshoot as suppress. And I'm just going to bring this input gain up until I'm happy with it. So I can hear that it's kind of crunchy. So again, like I said, the K-Clip normally only gets to about 16. So I don't know why it went all the way up to 18 before it didn't distort. So go 16.4, and on the Ozone, just gonna bring that down slightly, that down slightly. Basically, on the span, what I want, Ahi does a really good video on this, so if you want to learn more about this, go check out his thing. But he basically says that you want your low end and your high end to be about the same, and then around 200 hertz you want a dip, and then it come back up. And we've got that sort of so far. But a high end's still too loud, so that's about right. And maybe can squeeze a bit more out of the limiter. And as you can see now, we've got -5.3, -5-ish luffs. So I'm happy with that. And as you can hear, it's a nice loud master. Span, our low end is about even with our high end. We've got a dip towards 200, and then it starts to come back up. And then looking back, our lead's obviously too loud because of this spike here. So maybe I'd bring that down so it was like sitting here. But no, I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out for something that I've quickly thrown together for a mixing and mastering tutorial video. So yeah, that's my process for mixing and mastering. I hope this has been helpful for you. If it has, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe and maybe give me a follow on some of my socials. They're all at Aom Music. I'm especially active on Instagram. I reply to all my DMs and things like that on there. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.